Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Olive from St Mary's Church, and I'm here to tell you another story from the Bible. But first, I want you to think. Have you ever heard sirens in the village when a fire engine or an ambulance or even a police car is rushing through to go to somebody who is in danger? It's good sometimes to think about those people who are in danger when you hear that noise and ask God to take care of them and to be with them. And our story today is about God taking care of his people and rescuing them when they were being very badly treated. But first, I want you to think back to the story that you heard last week from Mr. Hardy. It was a story of Joseph. And do you remember his brothers were particularly mean to him? Well, at the end of the story, we heard that the brothers had to come to Egypt to get food, and Joseph recognized them. But instead of being mean back to them, he was kind, and they came to live with him in Egypt. Well, after many, many years, God's special family, who had lived in Egypt, had grown bigger and bigger. In fact, it was loads bigger, and it was called the children of Israel. God's special family still lived in Egypt, but by this stage, things weren't good. There was a king who wasn't like the one that Joseph had worked for. He was mean and nasty and made the people of Israel into slaves. That's people who have to work way too hard and aren't allowed to stop. Things for God's family had all gone wrong. And it got worse, because as God's family got bigger and bigger, the nasty king wanted to get rid of them, and to get rid of the baby boys especially, so that they couldn't grow up. That was a horrible thing to do, wasn't it? But God's family carried on getting bigger. And the king of Egypt got really angry, and so he gave the order that all of the Israelite baby boys should be thrown into the river Nile to get rid of them. That really was something horrible, wasn't it? Things were really going wrong for God's family. But there was one Israelite woman at that time who had a baby boy. For 3 months, that mummy was able to hide her baby boy from the nasty king. But of course, after 3 months, he started to make all the noises that babies do. He started to gurgle and laugh. And the mummy was really worried that he would be found. And so she thought of a plan. She hoped it would somehow work and God would protect her baby. She got a basket and put some tar on it to make sure that water couldn't get in, and she put the baby inside. And then she took the basket down to the River Nile and put it in the water amongst the reeds that were growing there. The baby boy had a big sister called Miriam, and after the mummy had left, Miriam stood at a distance to see what would happen. Well, then the daughter of the bad king, the princess, went down to the Nile to have a bath. She was walking beside the river when she saw the basket floating in the water. "Go and get that basket," the princess said to one of her servants. They went and got the basket, and when they opened it, they saw the little baby crying. The princess felt very sorry for the little baby and wanted to look after him. And at that moment, Miriam, the baby's big sister, was really brave. She stepped out and said to the king's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Israelite women to look after the baby for you?" The princess said, "Yes, please." And so Miriam went and got her mummy. And the princess decided to even pay her for looking after her own baby. So the mummy's plan worked even better than she'd hoped. The baby was safe with the princess, and the princess called him Moses. When Moses grew older, he went to live with the princess in the palace and was homeschooled by her and very clever teachers. But Moses was upset by the way that the Egyptians were treating his people, the people of Israel, and making them work as slaves. He got angry about that, and that got him into trouble with the king. So he had to run away from Egypt. He went to live in a place called Midian. He was there for a very long time, and he got married to a girl called Zipporah. But meanwhile, the people of Israel, God's people, were still slaves in Egypt, being really badly treated. They still hoped that God would somehow rescue them, and they cried out to him. God remembered his promises to Abraham and to Joseph and decided to rescue them. And he started this by talking to Moses. Moses was working as a shepherd, and one day he was out with his sheep when he saw a burning bush. It was very strange because the bush was on fire, but it wasn't burning up. And then he heard God speaking to him. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the voice said, and I'm going to rescue the people of Israel from Egypt and take them to a wonderful land of their own. And you, Moses, are going to help me do this by going back to Egypt and telling the king to let my people go. Moses was a bit scared and frightened, but God said that he would be with him and give him courage. So Moses went back to Egypt. He went to the nasty king and said, "Let my people go." But the king wouldn't let them go. He just made them work harder. And so God sent lots of bad things upon Egypt to make him do it. The king didn't change his mind until the Egyptian people begged him to let the Israelites go, because they blamed God's people for all the bad things that were happening. And so the king gave way. He let them out of Egypt to go to the land that God had promised them. What a crowd they were with all their belongings and animals. And the wonderful thing was that God went with them. In the daytime, he led them by a pillar of cloud, and at night time, he led them by a pillar of fire. But the most amazing bit was still to happen. The people of Israel hadn't gone far when the nasty king changed his mind. And he didn't want them to go after all. He chased after them with his soldiers and his chariots. As the army got closer, the people of Israel found they were in front of the sea and were very, very scared. But then God did something amazing. He drove the sea back to make a path for the people of Israel to get through the sea to safety. And when the Egyptians tried to follow them to get them, God made the waters go back. God had rescued the people of Israel from Egypt as they had hoped, and he told them they should never forget this, because it showed them that God would always be their rescuer. Well, that's an exciting story, isn't it? The people of Israel were treated very unfairly by the king of Egypt, weren't they? They were made to work so hard, and they were beaten by the workmasters if they stopped. God knew how they were suffering, and he sent Moses to lead them in a big rescue. from thinking everything was hopeless, their cries were heard by God, and He saved them. I'm going to say a prayer now, and if you want to make it your own, you can say Amen at the end. Dear God, thank you that you cared for your people who were suffering. Please be with everyone in the world who is being treated unfairly today. Give wisdom, courage, and hope to all leaders to change things like Moses did. Amen. Goodbye, and I'll see you again another time, and take care. Bye.